This is the ventriloquist dummy chapter, which is on page 186 of the Manson file. Nearly 2 years later, did the supposedly innocent and angelic Spahn Ranch newcomer Linda Kasabian need any lessons in criminality from Manson, who she barely got to know in the scant 6 weeks she spent among the Slippies? Like Atkins, Kasabian, despite her youth, came to the commune with a wealth of thieving and drug dealing experience behind her. In fact, as we will explore, Kasabian's entrance into communal life was her robbery of some $5,000 from her own husband's best friend. No cult leader was needed to brainwash the seasoned criminal trio of Watson, Kasabian, and Atkins to brutally settle a drug burn. Even when the court testimony meant to present Linda as the only good witch among the wicked ones, she admits when asked how she managed to live during an adolescent sojourn in Miami that her income came from selling drugs, or just people would give me money. I had a boyfriend. The three young thuggies, Sadie, Tex, and Yana, were more than capable of the deadly deed of their own volition. With a little help from the speed all three were flying on. Linda also testified in court that her lifelong penchant for that dangerous violence-spurring stimulant started during her brief 1967 pilgrimage to Haight-Ashbury, where a casual lover picked her up and turned me on to speed with a needle for the first time. The wild card in this loser's game was that, as far as we know, the least criminally experienced of the quartet, the usually pacific Patricia Krenwinkel, apparently ended up participating in the savage stabbing much more than the more experienced offenders Atkins and Kasabian did. Lest we fool ourselves for a second into believing that anything can ever be absolutely settled in the shifting sands of this ever-fluid bad trip, Charles was singularly adamant in insisting to me that Tex alone went crazy that night and killed everyone, and that none of the girls actually slew any of the victims. It's no wonder Charles told me the biggest regret in his life was admiring the shapely legs of the wayfish white trash maiden Linda, who Catherine Sher brought to the ranch. According to Charlie, because her husband couldn't fuck her right. I readily admit I was already biased to doubt Bugliosi when I first crawled my way through the monotonous mess of the Tate LaBianca trial transcripts in 1987. But it was still shocking to realise just how much everything the world thinks it knows about the crimes Manson is accused of commanding is based almost solely on the testimony of one remarkable and reliable witness, Linda Kasabian. With the helpful writing talents of Vince Bugliosi, who provided her with a script to recite in exchange for her life, Kasabian dutifully elaborated on the basic outline of her star witness predecessor, Susan Atkins' equally full story, only emphasising the Manson as a mastermind lie and adding helter-skelter as a motive rather than a stoned phrase for anticipated social chaos. Bugliosians like to forget that Atkins didn't mention anything about a race war or helter-skelter as a motive in any of her original widely disseminated statements on the crime. Those concepts only emerged in court as a motive rather than ideas floating around the ranch in Kasabian's tainted testimony. On August the 8th, 1969, it's important to keep in mind that Kasabian had known the man she claimed got into her mind and convinced her to kill for a grand total of 35 days. During the brief period, she spent most of her time with Tex Watson. For approximately a week of that near month, especially in the crucial days before the murders, Charlie wasn't even in Los Angeles. And in the 6 days after the murders, in which Linda hung around before splitting, Charles was so smitten with his new love, Stephanie Schramm, and overwhelmed with the catastrophe Linda helped drag him into, he hardly had a moment to socialise with this near stranger. The myth Bugliosi presented to a gullible media for decades paints Linda as one human being of conscience among the killers, a reluctant killer who, according to her risible testimony, pleaded with Atkins to make the killing stop, even though this moral apostle went along for the next night of slaughter and felt safe leaving her infant daughter behind with the killers when she left for Los Angeles after the crimes, and never made the slightest effort to notify the police of what she knew in the 4 months that she was on the lam before her arrest. When she was busted, as you can see in the widely circulated news photos of her being apprehended, far from cooperating with law enforcement, Kasabian hid her face from the camera, exactly like any other shamed murderer caught red-handed. She refused to incriminate herself until her attorney, Gary Fleischman, brokered a deal with the prosecution. Bugliosi and Stovitz suddenly had no case against Manson because Atkins had recanted her own false testimony. The reason Atkins made this decision was not to testify for the prosecution, was due to an underhanded trick Fleischman. Fleischman convinced his client Linda to play on Ditzy Susan. At her attorney's behest, Kasabian illegally smuggled letters to Atkins filled with misleading pseudo-Mansonian "we are all one" rhetoric. The gambit worked. The emotionally labile Susan, already manipulated by her own lawyers to spout false testimony in exchange for a worse but lesser sentence deal she never had officially sanctioned, was now persuaded by Linda's cunning kites to go back on her agreement to testify. That left the field wide open for the more outwardly wholesome-appearing Linda to take the rather sinister-looking Susan's place as Bugliosi's star witness. Fleischman explicitly stated that while Linda's original statement to him about the murders was scary, it bore no resemblance to Bugliosi's narrative, and specifically did not include any reference to Helter Skelter. Fleischman drove a hard bargain, telling the prosecution that his client would only recite their version of events under oath, and she received complete immunity, since without Sadie, the DA had absolutely no case against Manson, unless Linda agreed to lie. A devil's pact was struck. Let one of the murderers go free to guarantee that Manson would be convicted. Fleischman shamelessly admitted these cynical ploys to true crime documentarian James Buddy Day, who summarized the sleazy situation in his 2019 book, Hippie Cult Leader. In order to get the deal done, the DA would need assurances as to what Linda was actually going to say once she got on the stand. Gary knew that Linda didn't know anything about Helter Skelter, but with the opening day of the trial fast approaching, he reached out to a friend in the robbery homicide division of the LAPD. Gary asked his friend to go to the DA and tell him that he had heard that Linda knew enough to put Charlie in the gas chamber. A few days passed with no word. Then Gary finally received the phone call he had been waiting for. They came to me and said, "We'll give her complete immunity," and finally asked, "What's she going to say?" I told them Linda was going to testify that before they left the ranch, Manson told them to kill all of those people. After agreeing to the terms of the DA, Gary recalled that things moved very quickly. We typed up an immunity agreement which said Linda Kasabian will receive immunity if she testifies to the truth of the so-called Manson murders. The truth is as follows. Gary conceded that he was the one who wrote the truth on the agreement. I knew exactly what was necessary to convict him, Gary told me. Whether that was true or not, it wasn't my business to decide. That was Vince Bugliosi's business. I took the agreement to Linda and said, "If you testify to this, you're going to walk out of this courtroom." This was not news even when those words were printed in 2019. Fleischman was the first to admit with apparent pride that Manson was convicted only on the basis of chicanery and perjury. Linda's lawyer already admitted in a 2009 40th anniversary oral history in Los Angeles Magazine that the only reason his client got away with this grand deception was due to the gross incompetence of Charlie's lawyer, Irving Kanarak. If I'd been cross-examining Linda Kasabian, I'd have shoved that immunity agreement up her nose. Furthermore, those who were still duped into believing that Kasabian's testimony was on the up and up, and that the lawyers representing Susan Atkins were not tools of Bugliosi working against their own client, must also take into account Fleischman's blunt assessment that Atkins' lawyers got away with fucking murder. They sold her down the river. Although their criminal abuse of the justice system benefited his client Kasabian, Fleischman added to the damning admissions he'd already made to Los Angeles Magazine and James Buddy Day when he told Tom O'Neill that Caballero and Caruso's double dealing smelled to high heaven. Los Angeles, Day and O'Neill, all secular humanists, each in their own way representing the establishment viewing point on Charlie's supposed malevolence, were not in any way trying to exonerate Manson in printing Fleischman's revelations on just how corrupt the trial was. And yet the mass media continued to represent the Tate LaBianca show as a fair trial, almost entirely neglecting the fact that the one attorney responsible for pushing the lies has admitted it was all a cynical ploy for decades now. What you think you know of the Manson murders, through whatever distorted media source you may have learned it, is a variation on that lie that Linda proceeded to testify was the truth during her 18 days on the stand. A truth decidedly in quotes dictated by the prosecution to the defense. A truth that Gary Fleischman admitted many times over since 1970 was a story concocted by Vincent Bugliosi, because this lie was the only way to get Manson gassed. I don't know if Bugliosi knew or cared just how central Linda was to the planning of the Cielo robbery when he made this bargain. His careful monitoring of Kasabian's few interviews since her testimony lead me to believe that he knew very well he needed to hold her hand to make sure she didn't let any of the real truth slip. The truth that doesn't have quotes around it. Charlie, Susan Atkins, and Catherine Cappy Gillies were all adamant that Linda, the one guilty party Bugliosi let free, far from being the most innocent of the crew, was just as responsible for the slaughter as her co-conspirator Tex Watson. Lynette Fromy pointed out in her memoirs that the pejorative word pigs only entered the commune to the coarse, angry newcomer Kasabian. Goodbye Helter Skelter, author George Stimson cites Charlie on the same theme. She was stealing and calling people pigs and disrespecting people. Another source in the commune provided a more subtle but no less telling confirmation of Kasabian's character and key role in the murders. Sandra Good, in Lynette Framey's 2018 memoir Reflection, recalled that she only learned that her fellow commune sisters Katie and Sadie were among the unknown culprits in mid-September. Good maintained, as she does to this day, their move was for Bobby. In this regard, one detail in her statement is worth focusing on. If the assault on Cielo Drive was solely motivated by the girls' plan to replicate Beausoleil's murder of Hinman, then surely this scheme meant that everyone in the home targeted would be sacrificed for Bobby's freedom. And yet Katie and Sadie, when telling Good what they witnessed at Polanski's House of Horrors, assure her that Linda was becoming frantic as death became a reality to her, a reality she had thought she could face. Her panic generated more energy and haste to get out and leave no one alive to call the police. Italics mine. Yeah, that's written in italics. This description of Linda's frantic decision to kill everyone presents accords more with Manson. The description of Linda's frantic decision to kill everyone present accords more with Manson and Atkins' later claims that the original intention was not homicide, but that a planned robbery turned lethal, and that all witnesses to the failed caper were spontaneously slain in the resulting panic. Charlie also emphasized many times, as Good seems to suggest, that it was Linda who pushed the weak-willed Tex to kill so savagely that night when things got out of hand. If some still insist that Linda was the noble, honest heroine who saved us from the evil cult leader, even after learning that Kasabian's own lawyer admitted several times that his client knowingly gave false testimony, composed by the prosecution, they must also pretend to ignore other damning evidence in plain view for over 50 years. Even before Kasabian perjured herself, a young Harvard University student named James Breckenridge publicly provided posterity with a portrait of the real Linda Kasabian, as he encountered her immediately after the cunning drug dealer split the Too Hot for Comfort scene at Spahn on the 13th of August. In the early morning of August 14th, 1968, less than a week after Kasabian's plan to get revenge on Fikowski ended in a bloodbath, then captivating all of America's attention, Breckenridge thumbed a ride on a desolate road in the remote town of Gallup, New Mexico. An old white Volvo bearing a trio of hippies stopped to pick him up. At the wheel was a sharp-faced woman. In the back seat, two long-haired men. Breckenridge soon observed hostility between the passengers and the driver. They sensed she was driving a stolen vehicle. They agreed to head off to a commune the girl knew in Taos. Breckenridge noted the crude ignorance of this haunting, strange wild girl. She called herself a witch. Yana by name. Her name used to be Linda before the devil rechristened her, when he cut all my hair off. At the time Breckenridge wrote this, the ritual tonsure Charlie held for his witches a month earlier was not yet known to anyone outside his circle. When the hot car broke down, requiring them to hitchhike another ride, Breckenridge remarked that there were a lot of freaks on the road, so surely a fellow hippie would probably pick them up soon. He complained that the straights were less hospitable. This inspired the intense witch of a girl to observe, "Yeah, they're killing people like that out in LA." "Like what?" he asked. "Pigs that try to act like freaks." Is there any doubt that she's referring bitterly to the privileged jet-setters at Cielo Drive, who swathed their moneyed lives in the freaky trappings of the counterculture who burnt her on MDA? Only 5 days after she helped instigate the murders, her still seething personal animus against the butchered pigs belies the idea that she stumbled into a plot to kill random strangers. In a preachy tone, we can recognise as the condescending proletizing of the girls in Charlie's commune. Kasabian said to Breckenridge that death is just a hallucination. When a driver dared not stop to pick up the quartet of hippies, Kasabian ran after the offending car, squinted at it, telling a new companion, "You see, I just killed them. I can do that because I'm a witch. It's easy. You just close your eyes and erase them. And when you open your eyes, poof, they're dead. Along with her equally vengeful temporary lost soulmate, Watson Linda Yanners, innately, along with her equally vengeful temporary lost soulmate Watson, Linda/Yanners' innately vindictive nature played a big part in the vicious retaliation at Cielo Drive. She talked about death frequently, wrote Breckenridge in his March 1970 article in the Harvard Crimson. She explained how it doesn't matter if pigs were killed because they were going through changes, that they would be incarnated as beautiful people that much sooner. Kasabian blithely admitted to her companion of a few hours to using stolen credit cards, one of the chief methods of the Spahn commune used to maintain their precarious existence. Before she vamoosed from Los Angeles, Bruce Davis let Linda borrow a stolen credit card in the commune's collection. If there was any doubt as to her identity, Linda/Yanner also spouted some of the Manzonian musings about the coming race war and Hopi legends of bottomless pits in the desert that Bugliosi would soon twist into a motive for murder. As the wanderers get to know each other, Linda tells her life story, her birth in New Hampshire, her failed marriage, her joining the devil and his gang in LA. The gang, she says, were the ones who got me into a whole new world of lovemaking. She enthusiastically describes cutting capers with her friends. These are clearly creepy crawling, breaking and entering exercises. Charlie and expert burglar Bill Vance taught the commune to practice far from the condemning Manson on his commune or expressing any remorse. She praised them. When they go skinny dipping in a pool near some Indian hot springs, Kasabian reassuringly tells Breckenridge, "I've decided not to kill you." Linda's not satisfied with the Teos commune when they finally reach it. Too many N-words, she grumbled to the liberal college student. To her daughter, Tanya, who she left back in LA in the custody of baby killers, she says without sentiment, in one of those self-justifying twists of pseudo-esoteric logic she specializes in, that she'd given it back to itself. She departs in search of her husband Bob, who she'll soon be reunited with when she makes her courtroom appearance, presenting a much more benign persona than the kill-crazy hater of pigs Breckenridge encountered. Anyone who really believes that Kasabian was just a harmless lookout with a driver's license at Cielo Drive need only read this portrait of the hateful Linda, who lurks behind the phony mask of contrition she adopted for the jury. By all accounts of those who have encountered her in Tacoma, Washington, where she now lives, Kasabian still exhibits this same snarling, venomous manner. Kasabian did eventually make a brief, risky return to Los Angeles to retrieve Tiny Tanya. She even called her former friends at Spahn Ranch to locate her. By then, Tanya had been taken from the ranch and placed under Protective Services custody. Somehow, this supposedly remorseful and unwilling participant in the killings of a pregnant woman didn't take this opportunity to tearfully tell the social workers that she knew who was responsible for the murders that still terrified California. When his delinquent daughter emerged as a suspect in the unsolved murders, Rosaire Drouin, Linda's father, recalled that when she and Tanya sought refuge in his Miami home, she stole a bunch of stuff from my apartment. I knew she was hocking it to buy dope. Her fed-up father kicked Lasker's Linda out. She returned to the New England home of her long-suffering but tolerant mother, who comforted Linda when the international press announced on the first day of December that she'd been charged with 7 counts of murder in the first degree. Somehow she hadn't mentioned that to Mum in their What I Did Last Summer chats. In case anyone doubts this openly homicidal harridan described in the Crimson article was the same Yana the Witch who testified against Manson, Breckenridge showed up at the trial where he met with Linda's attorney, Fleischman. Kasabian publicly recognized Breckenridge on the stand as the man in the desert. She told the court that she was indeed given the name Yana the Witch by the commune. Charlie's well-meaning but ineffective attorney, Irving Kanarak, introduced Breckenridge's revealing account of the hate hippie he'd crossed desert paths with in New Mexico into the proceedings, but wasn't a skilled enough lawyer to effectively demolish Kasabian's innocent act with her own words. Due to the dirty deal Fleischman made with the prosecution in February 1970 and her willingness to tell the DA's story on the stand in July, Judge Charles Alder confirmed Kasabian's full immunity on August 10, 1970, exactly 1 year after she accompanied her fellow witches and warlocks to the La Bianca residence, where her favourite word, pigs, featured so prominently. Yana the Witch was free. She testified with a curious detachment against her lover-boy Tex in his Little Observed 1971 trial, and was arrested and forced against her will to be a witness in the second trial of Leslie Van Houten in 1978. A planned tell-all memoir Joan Didion proposed to write with her never materialised, when Linda realised she wouldn't see any dough from the project. Linda, like Tex and Susan, claimed to have renounced her witchy ways and embraced Jesus freakdom. To make it clear she was now on the side of the angels, she renamed herself Linda Christian for a while. As events would prove, Yana the Witch survived her Christian conversion intact. In 1996, after several scrapes with the law, Kasabian and her daughter Kuan Yu were arrested during a police raid in Tacoma, Washington. Mother and daughter were found in possession of rock cocaine, methamphetamine, drug-dealing paraphernalia, and a .45 caliber semi-automatic handgun with ammo. Linda's daughter, whose own lawless lifestyle under the sobriquet Lady Dangerous, was sentenced to a year behind bars. Linda managed to elude going to prison yet again. The meth fiend who helped instigate the most infamous drug burn murder in history got off with a slap on the wrist, agreeing to attend a drug counselling class. When she was interviewed in 2009 by Larry King, one of the only media appearances since the trial, Linda said, "I have been on a mission of healing and rehabilitation, and I went through a lot of drugs and alcohol and self-destruction, and probably could have used some psychological counselling, but never received it." Disabled from a car accident, Linda lives in a social housing unit in Tacoma, where she was ambushed by a Daily Mail reporter and photographer shortly after Charlie's death in 2017. The candid photos indicate that the outwardly innocent pigtailed pixie image that helped make her courtroom lies credible in 1970 has faded. Linda now looks like exactly who she is. Right.